Alright, all you history buffs and armchair admirals, it's time to dive in and talk about Germany's navy in World War II, the Kriegsmarine. When you think of the German military of that era, you probably picture the Blitzkrieg, the unstoppable waves of panzer divisions and the terrifying Luftwaffe dive bombing attacks. What you rarely picture is naval dominance. Now the simple reason for this is, well, because Germany never truly had it. Today on Jaxom Talks, we're taking a good, hard look at German naval high-level strategy before and during World War II, and asking a simple question. How did a technologically advanced nation with skilled sailors fail so badly at sea? This is not a story about cowardice or incompetence at the deckplate level. German sailors were extremely competent and fought bravely. Their new ships, at the start of the war, were often well designed, both within and outside of the constraints of the post-World War I treaties. Their submarine force was, as shown by history, justifiably feared. But bravery and technology are not strategy, and the overall strategy is where everything went wrong. Germany entered a global war against the greatest naval power on earth at the time, the Royal Navy of Great Britain, followed later in the war by the industrial juggernaut of the United States. It did this without the fleet, the doctrine, or the coordination needed to win. Even worse, many of Germany's naval failures were locked in years before the war began. Bad assumptions, unrealistic planning, lack of flexibility, and a leadership that loved impressive warships but didn't understand how modern navies actually needed to fight. So today, we're going to explore how Germany lost the war at sea, not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, predictably, and almost inevitably. Because by the time the shooting started, the Kriegsmarine was already fighting a war that it in reality could not win. Germany, the land army trying to think and act like a blue water power. During the war, Germany's greatest naval weakness wasn't its ships, it was its identity. Germany was, and in the main, always had been predominantly a land power. Its geography, economy, and military culture were built around its armies and later air force, not its fleets. Unlike Britain, Germany did not depend on overseas supply lines for survival. It also had no tradition of projecting power across oceans in the same way as other countries did. Even before the First World War, Germany struggled to reconcile naval ambition with its geographic reality. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles meant that the German Navy was hamstrung. The treaty limited Germany's surface fleet to a handful of obsolete or small vessels, effectively grounding any aspirations of competing with Britain on the waves. The treaty stripped Germany of its submarines, capital ships, potential naval aviation, and most of its maritime autonomy. This didn't just limit hardware, it disrupted doctrine, training, and long-term planning. When Hitler came to power and rearmament began, the Kriegsmarine faced a paradox. They were expected to rebuild quickly, all the while having to compete with the army and air force for every ton of steel, every liter of fuel, and every skilled worker. It was in that competition that the Navy, unfortunately, usually lost out. Hitler himself saw naval power as symbolic, not strategic. He loved big ships, he admired their prestige. However, he never fully understood how navies could be used to control wars. That misunderstanding and misplanning would shape everything that followed, because in reality, Germany didn't need a fleet that looked impressive. What it needed was a fleet that matched its strategic reality. Unfortunately, instead, it tried to build one that matched the ego of its leadership. Granted, some of these issues could be laid at the mid-war years and how Germany was restricted in what it could build. However, when you look at what it could have made, if it had just held off on the invasions for a few more years, it would have been a different story. Plan Z and the fleet plan for a war that wasn't going to wait. In January 1939, Germany unveiled its grand naval vision called Plan Z. On paper, it looked spectacular, consisting of a massive surface fleet made up of 10 battleships, 3 battle cruisers, 5 heavy cruisers, 44 light cruisers, 158 destroyers, 249 submarines, and 4 aircraft carriers. A navy designed to challenge Britain head-on and surpass anything France had. There was just one small problem. Well, maybe not such a small problem. Plan Z wouldn't be complete until 1948, and the war started in 1939, a full 9 years ahead of schedule. Whoops. This meant the Kriegsmarine went to war with what was essentially a half-baked fleet. It was like ordering a pizza and getting a box, with just some dough and a can of tomato sauce. This alone should tell you everything you need to know. Plan Z did not take into account for a time frame that Germany simply didn't have, resources that Germany couldn't spare, and an enemy who would not politely wait or would choose not to fight at all. When war broke out, the Kriegsmarine was nowhere near these numbers. From Plan Z they only had 2 M-class cruisers and 2 H-class battleships laid down, with a further 2 in progress, and only 3 O-class battlecruisers. The aircraft carrier was not, and would never be, operational. In addition, they had too few destroyers, and the submarine force was far below required strength. Germany went to war with a navy that was half-built and badly unbalanced. Worse still, Plan Z locked Germany into a surface warfare way of thinking at exactly the moment when submarines offered the best asymmetric solution. This was shown time and again, in many aspects of the German war machine. Instead of choosing a clear naval identity, they tried to do everything at once and ended up, well, simply doing nothing well enough. The German surface fleet, power without strategic purpose. German surface ships were impressive. There's no denying that, just look at the list of the newer ships they were capable of building. At the very start of the war, this actually worked surprisingly well. The German surface raiders, like the pocket battleships Graf Spee, Admiral Scheer, and the heavy cruisers, caused absolute chaos in the Atlantic. They were faster than the ships that could outgun them and stronger than the ships that could catch them. For a short while, they were the boogeymen of the high seas, sinking merchant ships and making the British Admiralty scared. Admiral Scheer and the heavy cruisers caused absolute chaos in the Atlantic, causing the British Admiralty almost tear its hair out. Although Germany had some ships that were well armored, heavily armed, technologically advanced for their time, naval warfare isn't just a high seas duel. It's a system, and unfortunately, Germany's surface fleet lacked that system that they needed to survive. Because of this massive disparity, every single new German ship was precious. When the battleship Bismarck, Germany's pride and joy, was sunk, the British threw multiple aircraft carriers, battleships, an absurd number of cruisers and destroyers at her. It was David versus Goliath, if Goliath also had a bunch of bigger, meaner brothers backing him up. There were never enough capital or primary ships, never enough escorts and support vessels. There was always issues with fuel, ammunition resupply, and worse still, naval warfare had dramatically changed. There was never enough air cover for the Navy. Every major surface ship became strategically irreplaceable, which resulted in that commanders were forced into an impossible contradiction of orders, to be aggressive, but also to take no risks. The Bismarck sortie, known as Operation Rheinberg, illustrates this perfectly. Yes, she sank HMS Hood and damaged the Prince of Wales, but once detected, she was tracked, isolated, disabled by carrier aircraft, and ultimately overwhelmed. Let me know in the comments below if you would like me to do a future video on Operation Rheinberg. Ultimately, the loss of the Bismarck effectively ended the German surface raiding tactic as a strategic tool. After that, ships like the Tirpitz became fleet in being only assets, too valuable for the Germans to risk, too dangerous for the British to ignore, so they just sat. Tirpitz, Bismarck's sister ship, spent most of the war hiding in Norwegian fjords, tying down Allied resources until British bombers using tallboy bombs finally destroyed her. This leads to a brutal question. If your most powerful battleship never fights a decisive battle, what was it built for? The U-boats and the Wolfpack, the German weapon that almost worked. So, if the big ships were too valuable to risk, what was left? Why, the U-boats, of course. The submarine arm became the star of the show, under the command of Admiral Karl Dönitz. In the early parts of the war, the U-boat Wolfpacks went on a rampage in the Atlantic. This was Germany's best, and really only shot at strangling Britain by cutting off its vital supply lines. If Germany ever came close to winning at sea, it was with these submarines. For a while, during the so-called happy time, it seemed like they might actually pull it off. U-boat captains became national heroes, sinking millions of tons of Allied shipping. But Germany began the war with too few submarines. Dönitz needed around 300 operational boats, where in fact he had fewer than 60. But even worse than that, the Kriegsmarine was plagued by equipment problems. In the early days of the war, their torpedoes were famously, hilariously unreliable. Imagine being a U-boat commander. You've stalked an enemy warship for hours. You've snuck into the perfect firing position. You let your torpedoes fly. They either run too deep and pass right under the target, or they hit the ship and just bounce off with a dull thud. What makes this worse is their allies. The Japanese had one of the best torpedoes of the war, but they never exchanged technology. Early victories came from the Allies' unpreparedness, not from overwhelming German strength. Eventually, they fixed the torpedo problems, but then the Allies got better at fighting back. They introduced the convoy system, fitted ships with radar, developed better sonar, known as ASTIC, and started using long-range patrol aircraft equipped with radar. As the war progressed, several fatal weaknesses emerged. The first was technology. Advancements in Allied radar, sonar, and radio direction finding steadily eroded the U-boat's greatest strength, stealth. The second, and probably the thing that shortened the war in Europe the most, was intelligence. Between the British and the Polish intelligence services, the German naval codes called Enigma were eventually broken. This resulted in careful selection of which convoys to be rerouted. They could focus on which of the larger U-boat packs were to be hunted down. This slowly eroded the strength of the U-boat fleet. Third was the industrial might of the Allies. The Allies could replace ships faster than Germany could sink them. However, Germany could not do the same for her losses. By 1943, the numbers could no longer work. The final issue was being adaptable. The Allies changed tactics to use their strengths by forming better protected convoys, focusing on the right ships to build so that they could maintain rather than excel. Germany was slow to change and adapt the tactics and equipment, especially as the losses mounted. By May 1943, the U-boat losses were at such a catastrophic level it meant that operations had to be curtailed. The Battle of the Atlantic was effectively lost. The one weapon that offered Germany a genuine chance of winning the naval war in the Atlantic had been neutralized. German inter-service rivalry and ultimately losing the war within. One of the Kriegsmarine's greatest enemies wasn't actually the Royal Navy. In fact, it wasn't any of the Allies, it was the Luftwaffe. Hermann Göring, in his infinite wisdom, refused to create a dedicated naval air arm. This meant no dedicated reconnaissance aircraft, having to adapt land attack aircraft for maritime strike missions and limited long-range patrols to identify targets or threats. All of these options were either withheld or poorly coordinated, which resulted in convoys that went undetected, valuable ships lacking air cover that could have protected them, and submarines that often operated in the blind. All these things have been clearly shown to be effective in other theaters, especially with the introduction of carrier warfare. Naval operations undertaken without air cover was a one-way ticket to disaster. Germany never managed to solve this problem, even though they had their own carrier laid down, and ultimately the Kriegsmarine paid the price. The self-inflicted disasters. At times the German Navy must have thought that they had an unfair advantage over the Allies, as some of their failures didn't even involve the enemy. As an example, Operation Wikinger in 1940 saw German destroyers accidentally attacked by German aircraft. This resulted in the loss of 2 valuable destroyers, over 600 sailors killed, and no Allied involvement required. When you add to this the other list of issues like poor communication between not just naval but other branches, political interference, constant operational cancellations, and Hitler's habit of frequently overruling commanders on land, sea, and air, you start to see why they struggled to keep up with the Allies. The Kriegsmarine ships were initially treated as propaganda symbols pre-war, not as tools for combat. When the war started, this did not change, and unfortunately for the Germans, symbols don't win wars. So in conclusion, why was the Kriegsmarine doomed to fail? In reality, why did Germany fail so badly at sea? It was not because of bad sailors. Germany had some of the best seamen in the war. It was definitely not because they had bad ships, even if some of the fleet was outdated. Instead, it was another example of why they failed in the war overall: bad strategy. The German Navy fought a war without naval superiority, or at least parity. They did not have the same industrial ability, especially after America entered the war. They did not have air integration into their tactics, and lastly, they did not have strategic clarity. They never really trusted their allies and didn't share equipment and technology in the same way as Great Britain and America did. The Kriegsmarine was caught between ambition and reality, and unfortunately reality always wins. Germany didn't lose the war at sea in one battle. It lost it through flawed assumptions, delayed planning, and leadership that never truly understood maritime power. By the time the Allies landed in Normandy, the outcome at sea had long been decided. You can build the biggest battleship in the world, but without the right strategy and infrastructure to support it, then it's just a very expensive target. They tried to fight a modern war with a fleet that was not supported or used in a fashion dictated by the reality it faced. It was a story of courage, ingenuity, and occasional brilliance, but it was ultimately overshadowed by a fundamental, inescapable reality. They were simply in over their heads. The German Navy in World War II is a fascinating lesson in what happens when ambition wildly outpaces resources and reality. So that's it for this episode of Jaxom Talks. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what topic you would like to see next. If you enjoy historical Navy action, then check out the Grim Reaper's channel. Here Cap and the team have videos where they try to break down what the ships of World War II could actually do. Click on the link in the description for their channel. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.